koiden lassen reden, und noch dem jetzt an Q&A session. Please, Shkar.
Like a recorder, okay. I'm not a recorder.
Go ahead. I think to talk about how I got my job as YIDLUG, I kind of want to go back a little bit and tell you a little bit about myself and my upbringing and my education. All this, at least some of the questions I got before I started seemed to be a lot of curiosity about how to actually go ahead and get a job at a Fortune 500 company. So, long story there, it didn't happen overnight, and so just to start from the beginning, I went to Chaim in Minkach as a little kid. After that I was homeschooled. My father was in chinuch, and so he ran chish, and for many years he also spent a lot of time raising his own children. So my brother and I were homeschooled until about till I was 10 years old. That's when we moved to Cleveland, Ohio, and so from 10 to 13 I went to the Hebrew Academy of Cleveland. I was a Chassidish yingel with long pious on down my sides, and I was in a school which had boys in one building, girls in another building, but they were connected buildings. So it was certainly a big culture shock for me. Also a culture shock for my classmates to see me. I went to yeshivas, mostly to literacy yeshivas. In my case, Shatter and Kew Gardens in Queens, Rebbe Gessin's yeshiva. And from there I went to Yisrael to the Mir. I was about 3.5 years in the Mir. And I came back to New York. I was in Lakewood. And I went back to Kollel Yisrael to the Mir again. I always knew I wanted to work in either work in computers. I also considered law school for a little while because all my friends were going there. Baruch Hashem, my wife met me, and as I think within the first year, when she heard that I wanted to go to law school, she knocked it out of my head. I started programming on an Apple II, actually a Texas Instrument 99-4A, going back to 1983-ish. My second computer was an Apple IIe. Which actually had a soldered chipset for Hebrew. So you had a little like Radio Shack switch on the PC that you'd flip over, and then you get Hebrew characters. I don't think it was ASCII even. I don't remember what it was. So those were the those were my foundations in computers. As a kid, when Netscape came out, I was a bocher. I guess one summer I decided I needed to see what the World Wide Web looks like. People had Prodigy, but I didn't. Very few people had internet, but my father was a professor at Stern College, and he had a Linux account. So I spent nights figuring out how to write or get a PPP emulator working, and I guess I was on the web really early. So I was a tinkerer for many years. My beginnings were pretty humble. I remember when I wanted to find a job, I asked a friend of my family's, hey, if I get a job in computers, can I make, not now, but maybe in 10 years, can I make $100,000? And the guy yelled at me and said, all you yeshiva buchrim, you're all the same. You all want to be managers right away. If somebody offers you a job for $30,000, run, take it, and just be happy you have a job. You know nothing. It wasn't a good thing to hear. It didn't make me feel very good. But I was in Switzerland. I took an internship at my schwers. I had a friend who had basically a system integrator company. They did a lot of checkpoint software installations and setup. It was pretty vanilla, if I recall. Nothing very exciting going on there. So I did a 3-month internship there where I thought I was getting paid, and in the end I never got paid. So it was humbling. When I came to New York, so I had twins. I arrived in New York from Yisrael. We had twins in Switzerland, where my wife is from, and we came back to New York. And I had 2 children and no job. And I started going. I applied to graduate school. I went to Baruch College for the master's program. I'm using a yeshiva first rabbinic degree. So my undergraduate degree is a yeshiva degree, which is probably available to most of you as well. If you look into it, it's possible to do. I mean, I've done it. my father has his PhD in psychology, and he's well known, and he has the yeshiva degree as well for his undergraduate degree, so it's possible. Can't tell you in every situation or in every case, but it's certainly worth looking into if you want to get your credentials and assuming you have the enough of a background to go for a higher level graduate degree. So I was going to school at the same time, a master's program in information systems, and I needed to find a job. I applied for a job at IDT. IDT was a telecom, a Jewish telecom. I had a friend over there. Family friend. She offered to put my resume in. I got an interview, and I was told, nothing. You have two choices. The guy told me. He said we can walk you over to the dial-up department. You can get a job as a guy who picks up the phone when somebody's dial-up doesn't work, a troubleshooter. Or you can work in our ISP group, our network engineering group, but only if you get more experience. So come back in 3 or 4 months after you get another internship, and we'll give you a job. So I went to another Hamish company. I'm not going to say which one because it was not a very nice experience there. We were a publicly traded company. We were in the financial services industry. I got an internship over there, and the guy was doing me a big favor. They gave me an internship. It was an unpaid internship. They were trying to be extremely friendly and nice. Unfortunately, it was a humbling experience. Me and a young Jewish woman were both brought in the same day. She had Novell experience. Nobody was using Novell, but therefore she got paid and I got the internship. And it was normal to hear when I did something wrong, here's the good thing about not being paid, Chaim, we don't have to fire you. You're not getting paid anyway. And they'd say that in front of the CEO, in front of the bosses. It was a very humbling and an unfortunate experience. After 3 months, supposedly they would consider hiring me. And what I was told at the end of the 3 months is, sorry, you have no ambition, you showed no initiative, you're not for us. And those were the words. I went back with that information, not with what they told me, but just, hey, I did a 3-month internship at this company to IDT, and I got the job on the spot. So I spent about a year, 13 months at IDT, during which time, about 3 months in, I doubled my salary, or 6 months in, I think. And then a year later, when I left, I had quadrupled my salary. Why is that important? I think it's important. Most of you are in your own small companies or working for small companies. Movement growth sometimes is a lot easier in small companies. IDT wasn't small; it was 5,000 people in there. When I was there, I think thereabouts. Net2Phone had just launched as a multi-billion-dollar, IPO. But there was a lot of opportunity to move around. I had proven myself. I think I walked in and I was trying to learn how to do OSPF, which is an internal routing protocol for those of you who know network engineering. Who don't know it, sorry. And I remember the other engineers telling me, hey, Chaim, you're at the bottom of our rung over here. When you know something else, I forgot what it was, come back and we'll teach you OSPF. And then I walked in, and it was holiday time. I worked the Kratzlich shift and the New Year's shift. I can think what day it was, but I came in and everything was broken. I didn't know why. We were a financial. Most of our customers were for T1 services, and those days were financial services companies. So they would kick and scream and yell. And I walked and I saw the network was broken. I didn't know what was wrong, but I spent about 20 minutes analyzing the configs and all the ATM switches across the entire network, and I determined that this is what's broken. Went ahead, applied the changes, fixed everything, and the senior network architect took a liking to me because he was impressed that I fixed everything. And he taught me BGP, which was in those days all manual. Nowadays we do a lot of that automatically, or we have software that does a lot of the sort of the shifting or traffic shaping for us. But in those days it was pretty manual, and he taught me what I needed to know. That put me in a very different league, at least in the service provider network engineering field. I used that successfully. I left IDT, and I ended up at a video conferencing service provider as their network engineering person. The company ended up growing. It was actually I think they call it a reverse flip. Like the company was a video conferencing equipment service provider. They sold equipment, and they were publicly traded. And they started a IP service provider. In the old days, video conferencing was done over ISDN. We were going to do it over IP. so over the internet, and I was hired to do the network. I was in school. I had 5 job offers. I chose the one that had the best commute. This was still New Jersey, so I was going from Hackensack to Hillside to Manhattan to home. I would leave the house at about 6:30 in the morning and come home at 11 at night. And I did that for 2.5 years while I got my graduate degree. So that was the job. Those were the jobs that I was doing. The company ended up selling off the resale company. We became this $100 million company. Was doing video conferencing over IP. We were pretty successful. In those days, I had some free time. I started a broadcasting company for shiurim, sort of. I guess probably not Williamsburg, but in many places where there's time to show them, they were broadcasting by Reisman Share or by Friends Share. So we're using video conferencing. We're using satellite services. So I branched out and learned some other things as well. I did that for about 5 or 6 years. I think 5 years or so. And then I decided I wanted to start my own company. I left with the company I had been in. We hired a new CEO. Him and I didn't see eye to eye. It was time for me to leave. I had a great idea. I decided to start my own company. And it was a very good idea. I had a lot of support. Jay Adelson, who became the CEO of Dig.com, was a pretty big supporter of what I was doing. He introduced me to Mark Andreessen from Netscape days. Andreessen Horowitz is how they're known now. Andreessen was intrigued, but told me to go get New York money, which in those days meant go get stupid money. And if you want to know what stupid money is, I'll tell you all about it on the side. The short story was, in those days, you were not getting funding unless you were in the Bay Area or you were in Boston. If you were in New York, you were not getting funding. I didn't know how to raise money. If I ever do a startup again, I will get a partner, because if there's one thing I'm not good at, it's at raising money. I couldn't even go to family members and ask them for money. I wasn't sure I'd succeed with how you take money from them. So that was my shortcoming. The product, I consider myself an ideas person. I've had many ideas that have been successful. In fact, the product I work on at Google today is one that I started. Is an area that was interesting to me. I got lucky. Larry Page was interested in it too. And I've spent the last 5 years at Google working on it, so I'll talk about that. Now, how I ended up at Google. My startup failed pretty shortly after I started it, about 6 months in. I needed a job desperately. I got a consulting gig in Washington, D.C. for a defense contract. It was a really large, in-the-field defense video conferencing system. I got hired as a chief architect to build it. I was billing by the hour. I thought, wow, this couldn't be better. I remember billing like 23 hours a day, and that was because I was nice to them. I felt bad. How could you bill 23 hours, 24 hours a day? There must have been a point where I didn't work. So I billed them only 23 hours one day. But that's what there's a life. There's an entire life and community that lives around these government contracts in Washington. They go for like 6-week cycles on bids or 8-week cycles on bids, and then they basically crash for 2 weeks and come back, or 3 weeks and come back. Not a very healthy lifestyle. But I had just done it. I thought it was pretty nice. I applied to multiple jobs at Google. And I actually had a friend who I met. I knew her from one of the. I used to go to North American Network Operators Group. It's a conference for network engineers, for ISP network engineers. And I knew this one person who I had met before we'd spoken. She worked at Covad. I worked at IDT, so we knew each other. And she put my resume in. She said, "Why are you trying this thing, your own company? Why don't you just put your resume?" So I did apply to 3 different jobs at Google. 2 of the jobs I applied for I thought were network engineering jobs. One was called Site Reliability Engineering, which is what are actually known as Linux system administrators in most companies. They're also /software engineers. And the other was network engineering, which I finally figured out when I realized SRE wasn't the right thing. I tried network engineering. And for those 2 roles, I don't think, well, there was some confusion to me. I was doing multiple phone screens. I didn't really know what I was interviewing for. There was a 3rd job that I applied for, which was video conferencing administrator. It was a job I had 0 interest in doing. I felt it was below me. it certainly wasn't an area I considered myself an expert in. My previous company, while I did network engineering for a video conferencing service provider, I was a network engineer. I knew nothing about configuring video conferencing switches. It had zero interest in me. Of course, when I finally got called down to Google for the actual interviews, and I realized I was interviewing for a video conferencing administrator job, I had no interest. So I think that's why I got hired, actually. I'm a person who gets nervous during tests, like many other people. And I don't think I was nervous that day because those jobs were not interesting to me. In fact, I remember telling the person who was trying to hire me, please don't hire me. I have this great job. I've just finished this consulting gig in D.C. It was awesome. I can do that for 3 months over here, or for 2 months here. Just hire me for a couple of months. I'll show you exactly what you're doing wrong, and then you let me go. Well, that's not how Google works. They made me a job offer. In fact, first the job offer was going to be for Zurich. Baruch Hashem, in the end, it came out to New York. It would have worked Zurich because my shver lives in Zurich, so that's why I entertained it in the first place. But in general, I tell people nowadays, if you have a company like Google or Facebook running after you, pay less attention to location. If they want you, if they go through the interview process and they want you, they'll figure everything else out afterwards. So that's how I ended up at Google. I got my job at Google. They hired me. It wasn't the job I wanted. I figured I'll get out of it really soon, or I'll leave really soon. I forgot to say something. When I first started working, I took my job at IDT. I went to my father and said, Tati, I'm a little nervous. What if I take this job and I get stuck at this big company? I'll never get out and do anything on my own. I want to do my own thing. And he started laughing. He said, you? I guess he considered me a little ADD. He said, you'll be lucky if you last a year anywhere. So it's now, Google, I didn't think it would last very long either. It's now been almost 8 years. February will mark 8 years that I've been at Google. And I've done various jobs at Google. Again, I was hired as a video conferencing administrator. Google is, as large companies have all kinds of, what they call job ladders or barriers in which they, mark employees and move them around accordingly. So at Google, I did video conferencing for a little while. I didn't really want to do it. I redesigned their system and left and started doing a VoIP project. My VoIP project coincided with our buying GrandCentral.com, which became Google Voice, and so it became an internal project really quickly, and then it faltered for various reasons. After that, we bought DoubleClick, and so I did a stint at DoubleClick Network Engineering for 6 months. Avi probably remembers while I was doing that. That was good for me because it had been a year and a half since I joined Google. I felt I didn't know how to sell myself. Was I a network engineer? Was I a video conferencing administrator? Was I a Linux administrator? I wasn't sure how to sell myself. So I did that. I sort of reassured myself, and at the same time we had a new CIO at Google, whose name, incidentally, is Ben Fried. He's not related to me. America. So he offered me a job as a manager in video conferencing. So I did that job, and during that job, I decided we had these systems that cost $60,000 a room. We have 2,000 rooms. Google has maybe 15,000 rooms we could be doing. It's not very affordable. Maybe we can build our own system. Larry Page had a very similar interest. He asked us to kick off the project. I did meet with him in person on one occasion, sort of for a real meeting to talk about my projects. But other than that, there were some side conversations, including one where I met him on the subway in New York. The project has been very, very successful. It's launched across Google. It's how Google communicates. We actually use video conferencing more than we use phones. And when we measure how successful we've been in communications, we noted that we have increased video communication minutes at Google by over 10x. So we refer to it as exponential growth. So more than 10 times the number of minutes we were doing before we had these systems. So every meeting at Google is done over this. I manage a team of about 16 to 20, depending on exactly where we are in the year, of engineers. Most of them are software engineers. There are a couple of guys who are Linux system administrators. We build a hardware/software platform, and it includes I don't know if any of you have seen this, but these are large video conferencing rooms with like 82-inch displays or 70-inch displays, HD cameras, really nifty touch displays on the table, all all built in HTML5, all web apps that are just running on a Linux core. So this is a Linux user group. I'd love to talk more about that, but I don't think that's the topic for today. So I'm going to go back now a little bit and talk about getting a job at Google, because that's about as much as I'm going to say about my job right now. Getting a job at Google is hard. Google has gotten really big, and yeah, they are snotty. They only hire Ivy League, 4.0s, GPAs. I had three interns this summer. One of them was an MIT student. Another one was a Berkeley student, and I forgot the third one, but my most recent hire is a Harvard grad. So that's what we hire as a regular rule, as a general rule. How did I get hired at Google? We were a younger company at the time. It was 2006. It was post-IPO, but we still had very high hiring standards. The difference was that I was well known in my industry for the work that I had done. And I think that makes all the difference. If you distinguish yourself in terms of the work you've done, you've built yourself a reputation, and you can do those on LinkedIn, you can do those on Facebook, you can do those via meetups, you can do those via conferences. Industry conferences can be really, really valuable stuff as tools for that. Creating a reputation around yourself, around your company, those help you get noticed. Does Google care about a graduate degree? They do. Do they care about your GPA? Yeah, 20 years later, they're still looking to see whether you got a 3.8 or a 3.2 20 years ago. And it's kind of nuts. And it's not right, but it's how we do it. And I have lots of reasons. Again, catch me later or for a side conversation about why they do this, and I'll give you the gory details of why I think they do it. But the short story is it's a culture, and the culture breeds what Google really cares about is people wanting to come work at Google. If the brightest kids in the world, the Harvard grads and the Yale grads, think that Google is the best place to work, and they only hire smart people, and if I work at Google, that means I'm smart, that's a great reason, that alone is a great reason to have those standards. Because it creates an exclusivity that actually is a form of cash payment, right? We could pay you $100,000, or we could pay you $80,000 and tell you how awesome you are. And $80,000 and how awesome you are works pretty well. We'll give you some free food along the way as well. So I think it's you can get hired at Google. You need to have a reputation behind you. You also need, another great way to get bought by Google is to actually have your company acquired. And Google acquires companies in two ways. It's pretty well known as an industry standard for these things. There are companies we buy because they have huge amounts of revenue, they have a great product, and we think, wow, if only we could own this. YouTube. Somebody at DoubleClick, right? Those are great companies that we bought because we thought it was right in our space. It made a lot of sense. Companies like ITA, which are if those you do airline or travel agency stuff, again, great technology. Not necessarily a space that Google was in, but a space that Google decided they want to get into. But then there are companies that are small companies, like a company with 8 people that's doing some really cool voice or audio array technology, or some really cool panoramic HD video. And what we're really buying there is the people. So we call it a talent acquisition. It's a 7-person company maybe. It sells for maybe $20 million, not a whole lot of money in terms of the kind of money that Google pays for acquisitions. You get your company sold and you get a job at Google. And generally speaking, they're not looking at your degree because they bought your company. They knew you were good, right? And that's kind of where a lot of really, really talented people who don't fit the regular Google mode come in. And there's a frum guy at Google whose name I won't give without his permission. He is a senior staff engineer, a senior staff software engineer, which is fairly high level, extremely high level, in fact. There's, I think, very few people above him at the company. And he's responsible for some products you all know. Again, since I don't want to say who he is, I won't use his name. I won't say the products. I'll say it's in the Google app space. And he did not get hired at Google. In fact, he got rejected in the Google interview process multiple times, if I recall. He has since joining Google as an acquisition. He has gotten promoted multiple times. So the answer, again, the short story here is you can get hired to Google in various ways. The hardest way is to kind of go the regular college route and say, hey, I have a degree and a GPA and I want you to hire me, because let's face it, none of us in this room have that background. Yes, I went to college, but I went to City College. Google doesn't hire people from City College generally. So the answer there is to be entrepreneurial, to try your own thing, to work somewhere else, to build up your reputation. It means quite a bit of interacting with other people in the space. Somebody mentioned to me earlier that it's really hard to work at a startup in New York because the environment's not great for Chassidish Yidden, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of many of my colleagues who live in New York live in Williamsburg. They just the other side of Williamsburg, I guess, right? They tell me stories. I should tell you about that sometime. Obviously, there's in Soho or in Dumbo. There's lots of startups that are doing things. There's a lifestyle that they expect you to understand and accept, and as a Chassidish Yid, it's hard to say yes. It's okay with me that you have a lifestyle that we don't consider. I grapple with those things. I deal with them. So it's not always a great place for Hamish to necessarily start out, which is why I think we have a lot of talent within our own communities, and we need to do better at starting our own companies. There's a lot to getting a job at Google in terms of how to prepare for the interviews and how to and what we hear about at Google in terms of your coding techniques, your testing techniques, what we call I guess there's a word we use for this, your coding hygiene. So how clean is your code? How tested is it? That's an important thing, and when you want to practice for your Google interviews, those are things you should talk about. When you run your own companies, you should do those things as well. I mean, at Google we have a code review process which is second to none. Every snippet of code that a person writes gets reviewed by another software engineer before it gets submitted into a repository. So any code running at Google has already been reviewed by at least 2 engineers. Those are good practices because if you get sloppy and scrappy now, it's very hard 10 years later to become clean and neat and organized. So I would encourage those things in your current environments. I think you can work in small startups over here in New York. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge that some of you are going to be up to doing, some of you are not going to be up to doing. Not everything's right for everybody. Not everything I do is right for everybody here, and not everything you would do are things that I would necessarily do either. I mean, we all have our own inhibitions, and working at a Goyish company, particularly so I think those of many of, at least in my days, the people I used to ask were people who worked in the financial services industry, and at least there was a big company, and everybody wore a suit and tie, and there were rules. We had a pajama party at Google once. So again, I don't know that it's necessarily the place for everybody, but again, these are the things you have to grapple with. And I think it's a great environment in terms of nobody's going to check whether you're at work for Yom Tov, nobody's going to check if you leave early Friday. Since all of us have Hamish and daven at a 9:00 meeting and roll in at 10:30, it works very well for me. Half my colleagues are in California. I show up at the office 10:30. I'm just in time. Nobody misses me. I leave 6, 7, depending on the night. I take my work home with me, obviously. So in many ways, it's a great work environment. Kosher food I mentioned earlier, I think, at least to some of you privately. Lots of kosher food, lots of benefits that make it a very good place for Hamish to work. On the other hand, there are some barriers that make it culturally hard for you to make it work. So again, not for everybody, but certainly for those of you who feel you can find your way around over there, I think there's lots of opportunity. I'm going to stop now and sort of take questions because I don't know how long I've been going. If I can turn this on. I'm sorry? I see 29 minutes. I was told 30 minutes. We're doing perfect.